Good afternoon. Hope everyone had a great lunch. I've entitled this talk, Cyberbullying, what we've learned and what we can do. And we're always learning. I always want to be teachable, and I know that that's your mentality as well, because we're continuing to make progress year after year after year, and we do have to convene every so often to talk about some of these issues. What we can do, that also is something that we're always learning. And notice I haven't said what we should do, because to be honest, it depends on the context of schools and jurisdictions and cities and communities and countries. But there are some best practices that are evolving. I'm grateful to Friends. They've organized such a wonderful conference. I love spending time with all of you. And I also want to say that though I'm up here and you're down there, we're the same, because I spend my working hours, days and weeks and months and years pouring my professional life into this topic. You're doing the exact same thing with bullying and cyberbullying, whether you're working with students, whether you're advocating about some certain cause or aspect or challenge that you deeply care about. We're exactly the same, and I love that. You see the hashtag, continue to use it if you are on Twitter, and we'll get into this. Let me also say that all of this stuff is pretty much on our website. If you need anything, just drop me a note, I'll get it to you. Also, if you perhaps want some of the video clips I share with you or others that I really like, happy to send those to you as well, just drop me a note. Let me start with a quick story. I'm a professor now, so you might imagine that when I was growing up, I was pretty introverted and very studious, and I had a lot of nerdy qualities, I would say. So, that gave a lot of ammunition to my peers to make fun of me and give me grief in a variety of ways, especially because I was kind of self-conscious, I was not very comfortable in my own skin, and I just struggled. Well, I remember specifically in middle school, I was in 8th grade, and it was PE class in our gymnasium, and we had 6th, 7th, and 8th graders all together in this one class. And the way that we lined up for roll call in PE class was according to our last name, alphabetical order. So I'm Samir Hinduja. It just so happens that the hottest girl in school, Melissa Hall, stood right next to me during roll call. Now this blew my mind, and I would be so excited to get to PE class and just stare at her for a few minutes before we went off and played basketball or volleyball or something like that. Now one day, completely out of the blue, she starts talking to me, and this absolutely blows my mind because back then, hot girls did not talk to me at all. Nowadays, it happens all the time. I got to beat them off with a stick. But back then, it wasn't happening. So we'd have these conversations, these chats, and I would have all these grand delusions about becoming her friend and her boyfriend and taking her to homecoming and prom and happily ever after. I kid you not, I seriously thought that. Well, there was a 6th grader in the class as well. His name was Josh, and he was self-confident, and he was popular. He was on the football team, and of course, he develops a crush on Melissa Hall and is seemingly threatened by the fact that I'm talking to her every day during roll call. So again, I kid you not, straight out of a Saturday morning movie, he comes up to me, and he challenges me to a fight at the flagpole after school. And to be honest, I was a little bit freaked out because my dad had never taken me out in the backyard and shown me how to handle myself, but he says it in front of all my friends that I have to save face. So I'm like, yeah, absolutely, I'll see you there. The rest of the school day, I can't concentrate on the schoolwork, what the teachers are saying. I'm just trying to figure out how am I going to handle this. I'm thinking about like movie scenes I've watched growing up. I'm wondering if I should whip out the crane kick. What is it going to take for me to handle myself? So the bell rings at 3 o'clock. I go out to the flagpole, and you can imagine there's already a crowd gathered there, and there's Josh, and all of a sudden, he starts yelling at me. He starts cursing at me, and I'm thinking, okay, I guess that's what I have to do. So I start yelling at him, and I start cursing at him. And then he comes up to me, and he pushes me, and I stumble backwards a little bit. And that's when it really hit me, and I was like, oh, it's going down, Samir. Get your head in the game. And so I just shake that off, and I go up to him, and I push him, and he stumbles backwards. But now he's a little bit humiliated in front of all of his friends, so he charges at me, and he pushes me, and I hit the ground. I remember that. I remember hitting the ground and feeling the tears well up in my eyes. But I also remember just like stealing my jaw and yelling at myself in my head. It's like, get up, Samir, get up, you can do this. And so I do pop back up, and I charge at him, and I was just furious, and I'm able to push him all the way down to the ground. But now he's out of his mind mad, and he pops back up. This is my life. And he pops back up, and he charges at me, and he grabs me by the shoulders, and I grab him by the shoulders, and we're wrestling, and he's straining, and I'm straining, and the entire world is just dissolving away except for me and Josh going at it right then and there. And then all of a sudden, he wrestles me all the way down to the ground. And then all of a sudden, he's right on top of me. And then all of a sudden, he beats the living hell out of me. Thank you. Thank you. You especially. I say that simply because it shaped me. Now, I won't say it had a tremendous, overarching effect on my life, but I was humiliated. I was mortified that this sixth grader was able to, take care of me, really, out there in front of all my friends. And I remember also getting suspended and then going back to school and then wondering, like, everyone's looking at me and pointing and whispering and calling me a wimp or a wuss or many other awful names. And then let's say we fast forward to 2017. How might Josh have given me grief in this day and age? I'm thinking, okay, PE class, we have to change in the locker room. Maybe, just maybe, while I was changing with my shirt off and my bird chest showing, he takes a picture with his phone and he sends it around to the entire student body. We tend to think that girls are a little bit more self-conscious about body image than boys, but I would have been devastated. I would have been so embarrassed and wrecked, and I'd be thinking, yeah, no one's gonna ever like me, especially not Melissa Hall. And so these are the sorts of things that, they shape and they color our lives. And, I had to deal with some harassment in middle school and high school, and then things got a lot better in college and then afterwards. And I was a late bloomer, but, now I think I'm, thankful for how I turned out and the lessons that I learned. But that's why we have to keep sort of talking about these issues, because if you and I were chatting over coffee and I said, hey, tell me about your youth, maybe you wouldn't be able to remember everything, but you could probably very vividly recollect instances of either you being harassed, you being the harasser, or maybe it happening to your friend, best friend perhaps. If you've seen me speak before, you know that I like to do some interactive polls, and so what I want you to do is take out your phone. And I know, technology, we get freaked out, but please, I promise this is easy. If you've taken a picture with your camera on your phone, or if you've loaded up a website, it'll be so simple. All I'm asking you to do is open up Chrome or Safari on your phone and go to this specific address, which is pollev.com/post. And I'll give you a minute to type it in, because for the first time, you do have to type it in. But then this poll and all our other subsequent polls will automatically load up in your browser. So again, you're just typing into your web browser on your phone or tablet or laptop, pollev.com/post. This will pop up, and I want you to answer this question. What is your current role? And this will just sort of help me to know where you come from, and I'll also do it on my phone. Again, pollev.com/post. And hopefully it'll work. And if we have some technical difficulties, I'll just escape out and come back in, and it should work. Let's try that, because I'm sure that's probably what happened. Thank you for your patience. Yeah, its internet went down, no problem. We'll get it. I'm gonna just restart PowerPoint. But I'm pretty positive after I do this, everything will be perfect for the rest of the time together. There we go. We'll get it. And if not, we'll just skip ahead. So thanks for your patience. While this is working, let me just share with you a few stories because I've got the time. So I was also a bit of a troublemaker in high school, and I remember specifically, me and my friends, we would do all these crazy things. For example, we would go ahead and, I went to the store and I got one of those watches, which allows me to sort of tie my watch programmatically into the television and act as a remote control. And so when we were showing a movie or some sort of documentary, I would use my watch and I would turn off the TV or turn off the DVD player. And it was amazing because everyone thought that I was so cool. All right, we're going to skip over our polls. Thanks for your patience on that. Let us move on, and let me share with you a little bit about my background. Back about 10 years ago, I wrote a book called Bullying Beyond the Schoolyard with my colleague, Dr. Justin Patchen, over at the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire. And to be honest, we were just sort of looking at trends, just trying to get a sense of prevalence or frequency. Then a little bit later, we started to look at prevention and response, and we even worked with some of you guys in order to sort of bring together experts on this topic and sort of flesh out what we can do. You gonna mess with the internet, maybe? School climate. Dorothy mentioned yesterday that America is obsessed with school climate, and that's true. And so back in 2010, we also focused in on this specific issue, and I'll talk more about it in a second. Then we wrote a book specifically for teens, and you guys know it's really hard to connect with teens about these sorts of issues, but we've gotten really good feedback because we believe we convey this information in a very compelling manner. It's not lame at all. And so it's got a leader's guide with it that people are using. The internet? Oh no, I'm so sorry. You can't see anything. Yeah, someone should have told me. I'm just rambling up here. That's okay. Okay, sorry about that. So real quick, because I know you care about the beautiful covers, there's the first one, there's the second one, there's the third. There's our book for teens. This is one of our more popular books, again, preventing and responding to cyberbullying. And then this is our most recent. Again, just sort of spelling out to counselors, mental health professionals, parents, school professionals, and other youth workers about what we can do in these issues. What is cyberbullying? Again, don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but we do have this academic definition that we share. Willful and repeated harm inflicted through the use of computers, cell phones, and other electronic devices. I know we all had a chat earlier this morning about definitions and other issues. Donna has mentioned this, Dorothy as well, about it co-occurs with regular bullying. About 10 years ago or so, we worked with Harvard on this Internet Safety Task Force, and what it pointed out was that bullying and harassment, most often by peers, is the greatest threat that minors are facing, both online and off. And I bring that up only because, at least in my country, there were a lot of adults who are very nervous and sort of shocked about the issue of child predators. And while that is a reality, this is something that demands more of our attention. Where does cyberbullying happen? Well, it happens wherever kids congregate. And we can recognize many of these icons, you know Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Snapchat and Musical.ly and Xbox Live and Twitter and PlayStation Network. But I want to emphasize, the vast majority of our kids are doing the right things. They're not monkeying around, they're not being morons, they're not being cruel, they're being relatively respectful or at least neutral. And that's what we want. However, with any device, any platform, in any situation, there's always going to be perhaps a few who end up being malicious or hateful towards other people. So we collected a lot of data recently, in the fall of last year, and this just gives you an idea of traditional bullying, school bullying. And I know I feel a little bit bad with my US-centric viewpoint here when we have such an international audience, but I would just ask you to extend a little bit of grace. So you can see that when it comes to, we'll just look at this chart, the second group and the fourth group of bars here, because that has to do with lifetime. So over a lifetime, and I know these numbers are high, but this is what we found. 71% of males and 74% of females, and then offending over the course of the lifetime, being a jerk or being mean repeatedly, it's about 1 out of 3. And again, this is based on a nationally representative sample of US students, middle school and high school. Cyberbullying, this was mentioned earlier, but yeah, the numbers are a lot less, even though the media likes to paint a very sensationalistic picture about online harassment and bullying. We'll look at the second and the fourth group of bars. I have been cyberbullied over my lifetime. You can see it's right around 33% if you average that out. And if you look over here, I have cyberbullied others, so being the aggressor, it's right around, let's say, 12%, 11% or so. So the point is that this is affecting our kids in very meaningful ways. Thinking about school avoidance, the first bar points out that when it comes to being bullied at school, it's leading to about almost 20% skipping school. When it comes to being bullied online, 1 out of 10 have skipped school, and they again point to being bullied online. Being bullied in a way that really affects their ability to learn and feel safe. Well, bullied at school traditionally, it's around 80%, and that makes sense because if you're bullied at school, 4 out of 5 kids are like, man, how am I supposed to concentrate? I'm always wondering what's going to go down at lunch or maybe in the schoolyard later today. But what's really interesting is that when it happens online, it's pretty much the same sort of ramifications. A solid 3 out of 5 indicated that, yeah, when I was bullied online, it still deeply affected me in the real world when it comes to my ability to learn and my ability to feel safe at school. And then just in terms of being safe at school, you can see that students who are bullied at school, only 3 out of 4 feel safe, and it's a little bit over 1 out of 2 who feel safe if they're bullied online. And those, of course, who are not bullied or cyberbullied, a solid 95% feel safe. And that's what we want, of course. It's always something, huh? Wait for my Windows wheel to stop spinning. No. Yeah, thanks again for your patience. So another thing that I would do with my friends was we would have some sort of assignment, and the teacher was up in the front, and she was really, really elderly, to be honest, and please don't judge me, but she would just be chatting with some of my other friends, and I kid you not, me and some other people We went back to her desk and we picked it up and we turned it all the way around and we rearranged all of the shelving and the paper clips and the calendar and everything to face the proper way. And it was just amazing because then when she went to set back down, she was completely astounded and was wondering how in the world we would have done that sort of thing. I'm going to get to tell you a lot of stories if we keep having these technical difficulties. So let's switch gears briefly and talk about digital dating abuse. I know that sounds very dramatic, but I simply mean, okay, kids get involved in romantic relationships because it's the thing to do. But then unfortunately, because maybe they've got jacked up sort of representations of what love is, maybe in their household, maybe in celebrity culture, maybe they just don't know what they're doing because of how high the emotions are and how low the emotions are. There ends up being various forms of power and control and abuse being demonstrated. For example, let's say that I'm out with my wife and it's date night and we're having a good meal and stuff, but then she has to go to the restroom or the bathroom and she leaves her phone on the dining table and I pick it up and I'm rifling through her texts and I'm going through her Snapchat logs just to make sure she's not talking to another guy. That would be wrong. We all admit that. Or let's say we're out on date night and I say, hey, Rachel, why don't you let me have your phone with me? I'm going to keep it in my pocket because I don't want you to be on Instagram or browsing the web or checking Facebook. I want you to give me 100% of your attention. Now, she should do that, but again, it's a little bit messed up for me to take her phone and physically control her in that way. So we're just seeing this, and you can see some of the other examples up here on the slide. I don't know what to tell you. Sorry about that. Resume slideshow. So we'll skip over these polls, if you don't mind, and we'll talk about what we found in our dating violence victimization. If you look at the group of bars on the left, and I know it's a little small, but I'll spell it out for you, it sort of breaks down various forms of, let's say, violence against these middle schoolers and high schoolers that we collected data from in 2016. For example, 10.6% said that their significant other tried to keep them from doing something they wanted to do. 9% called you names or criticized you, etc. Then on the right side of the chart, you can see various forms of electronic dating violence. Look through the contents of your phone or tablet or other device, prevented you from using your phone or other device, threatened you in a cell phone text message. That's about 3.8%. And I know these numbers are a little bit small, but still, they're meaningful. So to summarize all that, if we were to group traditional dating violence and online dating violence together, you can see that it's about 14% said, yeah, I've had to deal with this in the real world with my significant other. And about 1 out of 10, a little bit more than that, dealt with it online. So my point here is that this is just something that we need to be considering and perhaps studying because I believe this can be conceptualized in certain contexts as bullying or cyberbullying. Offending, again, I won't break down the charts, but let's just summarize this. Almost 10% said they engaged in dating violence offline, and then 7.1% revealed that they engaged in dating violence online. So those numbers are pretty similar, but still 1 out of 10 or so, it warrants our attention, I think, also a response. This is really interesting. 4 out of 5 of those who had to deal with dating violence online were also victims offline. And let your mind go to those places, thinking about dating violence offline, the physical abuse, and what else that could look like. 63%, so a little bit over 3 out of 5 of those who had to deal with offline dating violence are dealing with it online. So again, perhaps you're being abused in your relationship, in your romantic relationship, and of course, since technology is such a big part of youth culture and their lives, they're going to also embrace that technology to exert power and control and abuse. Skip over my polls. Let's talk about sexting. And I just think to myself, man, I would never have the nerve to ever ask a girl, let's say, for a nude. But I guess it's just so commonplace these days. It's trivialized, it's normative. You could be like JK LOL and sort of disarm the other person. But this is just seemingly such a big part of youth culture these days. We'll skip over a couple of polls if you don't mind, and we'll look at the data. And we can see that overall total, it's about 12% have sent a nude to somebody else. About 18%, so almost 1 out of 5 have received a nude on their phones. And you can see it goes up as you get older, which makes sense because we sexually experiment more as we get older. Again, these charts are on our website, and I can talk to you more about them later. Top reasons to be flirtatious. Okay, this makes sense. You're trying to deepen intimacy in your romantic relationship. It's what all the cool kids are doing, let's say, perhaps, to solicit sex, to get attention, as a joke, pressure by boyfriend, pressure by girlfriend, blackmail, that would be a crime, by boyfriend or girlfriend, and then sent on accident. I don't know how these pictures accidentally get out there, but I guess it could happen. Another quick story. So I go to the dentist twice a year. I'm friends with my dental hygienist. And so we just chat. She wants to catch up with me about my life, me about her life. And so she's got a son. And so she wants to show me new pictures every time I go, every 6 months, of her son and how he's growing up. And so I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Well, maybe when I'm getting my cleaning done, I'll give you my phone, you give me your phone, and we can just sort of go through each other's camera rolls. And she was like, no, I don't want to give you my phone. I'll just load it up on my phone. And so she goes over to her phone, she unlocks it, and she says that she has to show it to me in Facebook. But while she's opening up Facebook, her camera roll is already open, and I kid you not, boobs everywhere. So many pictures. And she was like, whoa, and she pulls the phone aside, and she's like, did you see anything? And I lied, and I said, no, I did not. But I did, and I still see them when I close my eyes sometimes. But the reality is that it could happen to anyone if they're on our device, if they're on our camera roll. But my main concern, because I don't have any sort of qualms about sex or anything like that. My concern is about victimization. And revenge porn is something that is happening where you might send a nude to someone that you trust, but then things go awry in that relationship. And so many relationships end in middle school and high school, even though deep down, I'm a huge fan of love. I want them to last all throughout time, but they just don't. And so a lot of hurt feelings because people's hearts feel stomped on. And then there's public humiliation because you show these pictures to your friends or you post them online, perhaps on certain websites specifically created in order to humiliate exes. Sextortion, we're also looking at this again amongst our population of middle schoolers and high schoolers. And again, these numbers aren't humongous, but I think they still cause me to wonder, dear heavens, how is this happening? So, 5.8% of males and 4.1% of females. Then again, we asked them some questions. So of the 277 who experienced sextortion, how did you know the person? It was someone that they trusted. But it makes me so sad that, can we really trust anyone? And I don't want us to all sort of have like paranoid perceptions about the person we're in a relationship with or that we like or that we're flirting with, but you just never know. And then just a quote that I got from a student whose ex-boyfriend did some awful things involving the nudes that she shared with him in trust. And just the toll that it's taking on her real life. How did the person who threatened you actually harm you? And you can just see repeated unwanted phone or online contact, sent a sexual image of you to someone else, 27%, posted a sexual image of you online, 25%, posted personal information about you online, also known as doxing, which is another trend that we're seeing. Stalking or harassment, that's a criminal offense, but that is also occurring in 15% of cases. And so it's hard to see what's going to happen. And we get involved in these, friendships or relationships, and we think that they're going to be good for us or our personal success or professional success. Like this one girl who was doing some local modeling, but things took a turn for the worse. And he ended up using those pictures that he took in good faith of her as she was modeling against her. Posting a Facebook account under a fake name, adding all friends and family and posting nudes, and then saying extremely hateful things. Who did you tell? They're confiding in a friend, which we like to see. 1 out of 3 are talking to a mom or a dad. 12% are talking to an adult relative that isn't a parent. And only 1 out of 10 are talking to an adult at school. You might be thinking, man, as an educator, do I really want to open myself up to these sorts of conversations? But maybe, just maybe we should, because we care about these kids, offline and online. Just a couple other examples. And you will not believe that every week, individuals are contacting us, and maybe even you as well, as you provide support to kids and to teenagers about their situations, about their instances. And even though, we've got this show called Catfish, you perhaps have seen the documentary as well, you would think that everyone would be wise to this and make sure that they validated their identity, make sure that they had some information about them, the other person, instead, in case things go awful. But I just feel like there's a lot of trust unwittingly offered and then exploited, which is just shocking. And then we're also starting to, we wanted to study this new trend called digital self-harm. Maybe you heard a few years ago about the Hannah Smith case, and there's Hannah. But after they did the investigation, which they thought specifically was cyberbullying, they found out that she was writing these awful messages to herself online. So what could possibly be the motivations? Is it a cry for help? Is it a call for more attention and validation and affirmation? Did she simply want someone to love her? Are there other sort of dysfunctional thought processes that go into this? So we've been looking at this, and We're going to continue to flesh out the research as we submit this paper for publication, but I just want to point out that it's about 7% of males and 5% of females who said that they've anonymously posted something online about themselves that was mean. And those numbers are similar when we asked it in a different way, when we just said, hey, have you ever anonymously cyberbullied yourself? What are these kids struggling with? How can we come to their aid? How can we support them? And again, I can share with you any of this sort of information. So let's talk about deterring youth bullying, again, in cyberspace as well as in the real world. And Patty Agustin, who again is president of the International Bullying Prevention Association, pointed out a couple of these, but I really thought that they're worthy to emphasize. First off, I'm not a big fan of formal sanctions. And we had I believe the General Secretary of the UN talk about how we need more resources to focus in on policy and legislation. I just want us to do so cautiously, simply because, from my experience and perhaps yours, just because we have formal laws prohibiting a certain act and we criminalize bullying or cyberbullying or whatever might be going on in a small town or jurisdiction, I don't think it's going to deter kids. A child or a teenager is not going to stop for a moment right before they want to go off on someone on Snapchat or Instagram and say, wait a second, there's been this law passed in my community and I'm going to be subject to this sanction and that punishment. And so, oh my goodness, I'm going to put my phone down, I'm going to count to 10, and I'm going to walk away, maybe do some yoga, get some fresh air. I'm going to feel a little bit better and then come back to my phone. No, I mean, many times cyberbullying, and we're looking at the motivations, but oftentimes it's spontaneous and it's just rooted in this deep visceral emotion, and then you act out. Not a fan of zero tolerance, which I know was also brought up by Dorothy and perhaps others as well, and the research clearly shows that every single case is nuanced and subtly different, and so we should take every incident individually and approach it as such. Not a fan of public shaming, and perhaps on your Facebook newsfeed over the years, you have seen instances of parents being celebritized, glamorized, pedestalized because they shame their kids to teach them a lesson. And everyone's like, way to go. That is so devastating for the kid's psyche. And we talked briefly yesterday with a few of you about shame and guilt and the difference there. We never want kids to think to themselves that they're a bad person. We just want them to think, okay, parents, educators, they're in my corner. They love me unconditionally. I made a mistake. It's okay. I can make things right. Forgiveness had a bigger effect than shaming and stigmatization. A nurturing school environment can make up for the adverse effect on bullying of an absence of parental reintegrative shaming. Talk about anonymous apps. They're never fully anonymous. A couple years ago, I got this email at my university, Florida Atlantic, that said someone posted on Yik Yak, which is an anonymous app which only recently shuttered. They posted on Yik Yak that they were going to bring a gun to the Breezeway, which is our main strip on campus, and shoot it up. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, this cannot happen. And so I got on Yik Yak and I saw some of the yaks, and people were very nervous. People were a little bit freaked out about this. And then it was sort of spreading across all social media. And my wife actually went to Virginia Tech, and if you're familiar, back in 2007, there was a major school shooting at Virginia Tech, and so I didn't want my campus to go into lockdown mode. So I was just hoping that something was going to happen. Thankfully, law enforcement got involved, and they worked with Yik Yak, who still has subscriber records, IP addresses. Each of our devices have a unique identifier tied to the hardware itself, so they were able to look at their logs and identify who was paying for this cell phone plan. It was a family who had a kid who went to FAU, and they found him immediately. And then they, of course, expelled him. There goes his college career, even though he was perhaps just joking. And they filed charges because it's a felony offense to issue any sort of threat. Don't use fear-based messaging. This was brought up yesterday, I believe by Dorothy and perhaps also by Donna. Everyone gets really, really nervous, and everyone's on tilt. And then when we are just sort of motivated by fear, we end up making decisions that are irrational and not responsible and balanced and calm. Assemblies, believe it or not, I actually think that they do have value. But as it was mentioned also previously, you got to make sure that you have a plan, because research is shown specifically by my colleagues David Finkelhor, who published an article in 14 in Child Abuse and Neglect, that, okay, when you have assemblies, make sure it's not just a one-day sort of affair. Make sure you have a comprehensive effort that backs it up. Make sure you send home information with parents. Make sure you get parents to come to a parent event, because we've got to reach parents. And make sure you also tie it into role-playing scenarios in instructional settings. So that's what the research showed, that you should tie into assemblies. I think assemblies are very valuable as a launching pad or a springboard, perhaps at the beginning of your year. I've written blogs specifically about how to do assemblies well to make sure you connect with your audience. Choose speakers wisely. There's been articles in the news about, this was mentioned also yesterday, I believe, by Dorothy, how everyone is an expert these days. on this topic. And honestly, if you're unwise and you use improper videos that perhaps haven't been vetted carefully, you might be planting seeds in the minds of your youth that suicide is a viable option to escape their problems, which is horrific to even think about. This was also brought up. I don't want to spend any time on it, but you know that there's all sorts of other factors, third-party factors going on in the background of most youth who end up taking their lives. We want to give students a stake in conformity. How do we get them invested in the school and in society and in their community in general? If we're able to do that strategically and creatively, then they'll care more. Then they'll feel like they belong to something epic and meaningful. We'll talk about how to do that. And I love this quote. I'll give you a second to read it. This is part of our responsibility. It really is. And I know our plates are full. I know we're overextended. I know we're under-resourced. But why are we in the youth-serving professional field? It's not because of our salaries. It's because we want to make a difference and have a legacy. Do remember their outside world. Again, we see them at school, let's say, but there's a lot going on outside the school walls. Let's think about the problems that they might be struggling with and how it's affecting them, similar to how you sort of bring problems into the workplace, and it kind of affects your mood sometimes and your behavioral decisions and your attitudes. And are we also asking our students about their goals, their hopes, their wishes, and their dreams? Are we demonstrating very intentionally that we care about their lives and about their future? I wish my teacher knew that my dad works 2 jobs and I don't see him much. I wish my teacher knew that my family and I live in a shelter. Are we giving opportunities for our kids to speak up and tell us about their stories? Their stories matters so much. My little brother gets scared and I get worried about getting up every night. So this one child is losing sleep, and perhaps that's the reasons why they can't focus or why they're not doing so well on their quizzes. Let's be gracious. I wish my teacher knew I want to learn more about history. They are motivated. They are inspired. Let's just not assume that they're just trying to get through their days and want to play with their friends immediately after. They want to learn. And then do see the best in them. My heart just breaks. I love this. When we believe in them, they rise up. I get a little bit emotional when I think about that because I've had people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. If that's the only thing we do every day with the kids that we work with, it'll matter. And then I'm a big fan of Benjamin Franklin, and this is what he said: tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, but involve me and I learn. And that's why, and I alluded to this earlier, I'm a huge fan of role-playing scenarios. And we have a boatload on our website and in our books, and I'm happy to send them to you, and I know many of you have created your own scenarios. Some of you have even used scenario-based learning when you're studying empathy, et cetera. Like I know James McCauley had a cool poster out there related to these sorts of things. So here's just one example, a different James. We just created a little scenario, and they run the gamut. We talk about different social networking sites and provide different sorts of instances of harassment. And then the goal is share the scenario, ask the follow-up questions with the students in your lives, with the children in your home. Commend them for the right actions and responses and answers, and then correct them for the improper actions or responses. Just fill the gap. That's what we're supposed to do as educators, as adults. School climate. And again, even though America obsesses about this, I still believe deeply in it, and I just want to share with you about it for a couple of minutes. So those of you who have taken personality tests, you've sort of determined what is unique about you as an individual. So me specifically, when I've taken a personality test, it sort of pointed out that I'm cerebral, I'm introverted, believe it or not, I'm very sensitive, those sorts of things. According to Myers-Briggs, I'm ISFJ, in case that interests you. Well, just like individuals, you and me, we have personalities. Organizations like schools or other NGOs, they have climates. And the climate simply means all these elements like connectedness and belongingness and peer respect and school safety and school spirit, all sort of just like coalescing together. That's climate. And so this is just such a very, very important topic and concept, simply because when we study it, and that's what we did. You can see how we studied it. We asked questions about, hey, do you feel safe? Do you feel that teachers treat everyone fairly? Are they invested in your success? Do they take bullying seriously? Do students trust and respect the teachers? Stuff like that. So we used a validated scale, and what we found very clearly was that schools where students perceived a poorer or a worse school climate, well, in those schools, there was definitely more bullying and cyberbullying and sexting. Said in another way, students who responded and answered those school climate questions and said, hey, you know what? Our school climate's pretty solid. Clearly the school is focusing in on this, connectedness, morale, those sorts of issues. Well, in those schools, there was definitely less, significantly less bullying, cyberbullying, and sexting. Percent of students who cyberbullied others who said that teachers talked to them about being safe online. Well, you can see, and I know that those bars, the magnitude of those bars isn't massive, but it was still a statistically significant relationship. Are you in the schools talking about being safe online? It matters when it comes to cyberbullying. And then this just points out that students in schools where they perceived a lower or a worse school climate, well, in those schools, students believed as a whole that the school would not respond very meaningfully to bullying or cyberbullying. Said in another way, in schools where the students thought, yeah, our climate is awesome, everyone is connected, and there's great sort of esteem overall, and connectedness and belongingness and all of that, well, in those schools, they believed that the teachers and the administrators were very keen on responding. And so, of course, in those schools, there was going to be less bullying and cyberbullying because of that perception. It's called general deterrence. So, in terms of climate, we hear about kindness movements, and it's been brought up many, many times over the course of our days together that we've got to enlist youth, and they're the most powerful catalyst for change. And so I think it matters. And I know it sounds a little bit fluffy, and to be honest, I would be hesitant to use the word kindness movement in a high school, let's say, because you want it to gain traction, and you don't want everyone to just roll their eyes. But there's different ways to sort of pitch it to youth, and it does matter. And again, in our book, we've written about making kindness go viral in very strategic ways. Social norming has also been talked about for decades, and the point there is that we simply want to take prevailing mentalities across the student body and make sure that they're accurate. For example, let's say I had all the high schoolers in Stockholm in this auditorium, and I was just asking them different sorts of questions about, hey, how many of you have engaged in underage illegal drug use? And all these hands go up, maybe like 60, 75% hands go up or whatever, and they tell me, as I choose on them, it's about 80% or whatever of these hands that go up. Again, I'm asking them their perception, so I said that incorrectly, but to summarize, I asked them their perceptions about how many kids are doing something risky, whether it's illegal drug use, whether it's engaging in sex in really young ages, whether it's underage drinking, those sorts of things. The point is that many of those kids, they think that everyone is doing it, even though when you look at those statistics, many times it's the minority of kids, less than 50%. And so when it comes to bullying and cyberbullying, many people think that perhaps it is a rite of passage, and maybe not. That's something that we agree with at all, of course, and we don't stand for that. But many people also think that we shouldn't talk to adults. We're just going to be silent, and you just got to cope with it and grow a backbone. But when you actually ask the students, hey, what are your perceptions about this? Anonymously, they say, we're not on board with this at all. We think it's seriously messed up, and we want anyone to participate in it. Similarly, we are comfortable talking to adults, and we want everyone else to do the same. So again, social norming is just changing prevailing mentalities, getting everyone to understand that, you know what? A minority of kids are actually jerks online. Join us. Don't be on the fringes. Don't be on the margins. Hang out with the rest of us. Be a part of what we're trying to create here, this community, this climate. And then digital citizenship efforts. This is another thing that I would say America is obsessed with, but I think it's bearing fruit because we want our kids to be decent human beings, both in the real world as well as online. So whether you have them Google themselves or do other sorts of things related to internet addiction or plagiarism or, of course, sexting, etc., we've created a number of activities. Drop me a note. I'm happy to send them to you. And I'm sure many of you have as well. Purpose pairing. We're seeing this fruitful in schools where you perhaps pair a 12th grader with a 9th grader or an 8th grader with a 6th grader or 5th grader with a 1st grader to show them the ropes, to say, hey, this is how we do things here, and we need you to be a part because we're believing that you and the rest of us are going to rise up to a really high behavioral standard and not, screw around or do stupid things or be cruel to each other. So sets the standard, but also provides a point person so that whenever the younger person might be dealing with some sort of issue, whether it's bullying or cyberbullying, they know exactly who to go to. And that helps. Many times you and I would agree, or hopefully would agree, that we've gotten through life just because we've had one person on our side to help us through it. Kids need that, perhaps exponentially so. Lines of communication. If I went to your school and I grabbed any of the students and I said, hey, if you were ever struggling with something at home, like let's say your parents were really fighting all the time, or let's say that you bombed an exam at school or something like that, name one adult that you would go to. And I hope that within a microsecond, a name pops into their head, whether it's someone at school or whether it's someone at home or a coach or a leader in the community. We need to have these lines of communications. It matters so much. Plus, we've also heard the term trusted adult. Whenever a kid is victimized, we want them to go talk to a trusted adult. I'm kind of tired of that term. And instead, I want you guys, to be the askable adult, because I want you to be simply available to talk to kids, not just as like a lifesaver and to rescue them when they're in trouble, but just to chat out. Hey, how are things going? How are you succeeding currently in certain areas? How are you struggling in certain areas? Hey, let me tell you a little bit about my life and how I overcame these obstacles and how I sort of mustered enough confidence to get through. So again, be the askable adult. I think it matters so much, again, just simply being available to our kids and demonstrating that you care. And I know some of us, it's just hard to connect with them, and I don't know how to broach even any sort of topic because I feel just foolish, but just try. Student advisory boards, and this was also mentioned by Donna, we've got to bring students to the table. When we're working on our policies, on our programming, specific to cyberbullying, they will let you know about devices and sites and apps that you've never even heard of. They will also specifically tell you what of your programmatic strategies will fail, like a lead balloon, and what will actually succeed. Ask them, but if you don't ever ask them and you just assume you know what to do, you're going to fail more often than not. So just heed their voice, validate their voice. I'm a big fan also of anonymous reporting systems, and I know that there's various sorts of companies out there which ask you to pay for this, but I wrote a blog about how you can use Google Voice in order to set up a number that you can not just have voice messages and stuff to, but also text into. And I just feel like many students, they're surveying the landscape and they're looking for a way to talk, to share what's going on campus or in the community organization related to victimization or related to various struggles. But they just don't want it to bite them in the butt. They don't want to be labeled as a rat or a narc or a tattletale. They don't want to be targeted for more retaliation. Give them that venue. You can easily create a web form via Google Docs and put it on your organization or your school's page. If you need any help with that, let me know when it comes to Google Voice or a text line or anything like that. And then I mentioned this earlier, we got to get kids invested. So tie it into your school's identity. That way they start to believe, you know what? This is just what we do around here. The right thing, the noble thing, the cool thing, the classier thing. Not the juvenile thing, not the immature thing, not the lame thing. And we also want to get them to move from, I shouldn't do that because I'm going to get punished, to I wouldn't do that because, hey, I'm better than that, we're better than that, we're part of something epic and transcendent. So yeah, you see that. And so it's really related to messaging. So think about your organization, think about the students that you're working with, and what sort of messaging strategies are you employing when it comes to posters, when it comes to YouTube videos, when it comes to social media, when it comes to different sorts of ways enlisting them to create the content to constantly remind everyone of what you're all about. And I do think it's all tied into school climate or esprit de corps. Empathy. I saw some shirts which says that empathy is the new black. I would totally rock that. And so I'd love to hear more about your program, but we simply want kids to care about others and put themselves in the other's shoes. And so I think that you can do that through literature without a doubt. These are some of my favorite books. El Defo is about this one kid who's got a facial deformity, and my best friend has a facial deformity, I kid you not. And so I empathize really much with that specific book. Where the Red Glo Grows, another classic, One and Only Ivan, award-winning book about this one gorilla who lives in this storefront of a mall, this glass sort of cage, let's say, and he's pretty much only about himself, but then there's a small little elephant who joins him in this storefront in a mall, and he learns how to not just care about himself, but also care about this little guy. Many of us have perhaps read Wonder was about a facial deformity. El Defo was about having to wear a hearing aid around your neck and just the struggles that girl had to deal with. Same Sun here, about just two different people. One person lives in New York, one person lives close to the coal mines in Kentucky, and just how their lives are still very similar. Family Under the Bridge, another amazing book about this one homeless fellow who lives under a bridge by the Seine River in Paris. And again, he's only about himself, but then one day he comes home to a spot where he always sleeps and sees that there's this other homeless family. And of course, he's really irritated that someone had the nerve to take his spot, but then he develops empathy. Out of My Mind, another really good book, Inside Out and Back Again, about this one refugee who eventually makes it to America after leaving Vietnam, and just her story. I want kids to care about things that are outside of their own country and the struggles that other people have to go with. And the breadwinner, what's it like to be a kid or a teenager growing up in a Taliban sort of owned or like a Taliban regime in Afghanistan, in Kabul. Think about exposing our kids to that. I think it's so instructive. And then through movies, here are some of my favorites. Inside Out, Les Miserables, Pete's Dragon made me cry twice. The King's Speech, I love that movie. Zootopia, and The Breakfast Club from the mid-'80s. Just how, again, even though we're all different, we belong to different cliques, we all still sort of have a lot of commonalities. The human condition in and of itself. And then also, here are just some simple questions that you can ask to stimulate conversation. Were you kind to your classmates today? How? Again, expecting them to be kind, to be intentional, not just neutral, not just sit on their hands and do nothing. What would you do if you saw a friend harassing someone on social media? Again, try to promote a little bit of an intervention rather than them just minding their own business and keeping their head down. Why do you think teens hurt themselves? Trying to get into the psychology of that. Maybe they'll also share what they struggle with. There are a lot of tensions and stressed out people in our country right now. What should we do? What can you do? Believing they have a voice, empowering them. These are the sorts of questions I believe promote empathy. Are we asking them amongst our kids? Then we can have various sorts of interactions. Having certain individuals interview other kids who perhaps might not sit down together at lunch together, but still getting to know each other. But you have to force that sometimes. Purposeful acts of kindness instead of random acts of kindness. Again, getting everyone on board with that. Then I'm a big fan of Tim Tebow. I don't know if you know him, but he was a football player and now he's trying to make it in baseball. I try to live by his motto, which is that hard work beats talent whenever talent doesn't work hard. And I love that quote, and I think it's so true. But anyways, he's passionate about those with special needs, and he organizes a prom every year across our entire nation, and just to sort of support this population and love on them. That's how you build empathy. Get other kids involved. Then validation, I think about this a lot. I mentioned this one kid named Caleb, and he's, let's say, 15 or so. He posted this on Instagram. Your opinion of me doesn't define who I am. And I was like, sweet, all the conversations we've been having, they're actually working. Like, I'm making a difference in his life. He's realizing that it shouldn't be all about peer perception dictating his self-worth. So let's say that was posted around 11 hours ago. I kid you not, 2 hours later, so 9 hours, he posted this. RIP, I just died. If you don't care, stop reading. If you would care, like this pic. And if you would miss me, comment with a heart. I'm thinking, oh, Caleb, you're killing me, because you come across as so desperate for everyone to like you and to love you and be interested in you. But with that said, I want to extend so much grace towards Caleb because I was the exact same way. When we're growing up, we struggle with so much self-doubt. Many times we even hate certain things about ourselves. And we need other people to reassure us that we're okay, that other people are interested in us, that do want to hang out with us, that do want to date us, get to know us even better. I think it's important to share positive stories as well. Here's one of my friends, Sana. Of course. Is the soundboard muted? And if not, we won't worry about this. I can just summarize it. Cool, I'm not going to worry about it. It's okay. So the story with Sana is that she struggles with alopecia, which is a hair loss disease. And it blows my mind how she has had to endure this during all these years of high school. Now, for many years, she wore wigs just to try to cope with it, just to sort of fake it until she made it. And then she was like, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of not being authentic. And so one day she made a Facebook video taking off her wig, sort of exposing herself and then sharing her story. And she didn't know how everyone would react. But then when she got to school the next day, everyone supported her and loved her and was in her corner. And it was just so amazing. And so she decided to create this movement called Natural Day. And it's on February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. And so on February 13th, on Natural Day, all girls across the nation, across the world, are supposed to go to school without trying to be perfect, without their attire or their dress being perfect, without wearing makeup, without their hair all perfect and straightened or whatever, just to be natural and just to believe that the world is a kind, accepting place. And she was really specific about it being on February 13th because she said, it's got to be the day before Valentine's Day because you're not really able to love others unless you're able to love yourself. So I also get chills just sort of sharing that because, again, we do struggle sometimes with loving ourselves, and that sort of jacks up the way that we love others. We've also seen various trends involving anonymous compliments on social media pages. At my university, FAU, we use Facebook, and you can see that I've been featured on this page 4 years ago, and I hope someone notices that I'm a good person and recognizes me again. But to be honest, I don't do it to be commended or noticed. But it was really awesome that someone did say, wow, Samir's a cool guy. And I think that what he's doing on campus and the presence that he is, it's adding a lot of quality. And so that made me feel amazing for like a whole week. And so periodically, every day, let's say, every few hours, another person is featured. It's usually students, sometimes it's faculty. And it's just a cool thing that we see happening. We've also seen it on Instagram and other sites. I also think about parenting a lot, simply because students are at home many more hours than they are at school. But even more than that, because we're pregnant. And so my wife is due in September, and so I care a lot about this. Thanks. I was trying to figure out how to announce it to the world, and so thankfully we got this incredible shot. And everyone was just like so thankful and so excited for us. And so the point here is that we're starting to study this in our research. And we're looking at a few things. So look at these in couples, these first couple bars. Involvement and warmth is the opposite of rejection. Structure is the opposite of chaos. Autonomy support is the opposite of coercion. Let me explain them. Warmth is simply being loving and caring. Rejection is not doing that. Structure is where you say, okay, we've got these rules and we expect you to follow these rules and there's certain times of the day when you should do certain things. Chaos is when everything is arbitrary. Autonomy support is where we sort of tell our kids that, you know what, we want you to have various sorts of preferences and opinions. We encourage decision making. Coercion is the opposite of that, where we're just very controlling. And so in the specific bar chart, you can see that across the board, what is intuitive is that those kids who did not bully others, well, they were raised in houses or homes which were marked by more warmth than rejection, more structure than not, less chaos than not, more autonomy support than not, and less coercion than not. Again, it's intuitive, but it's really cool that that was borne out in the research. Same sort of findings when it comes to cyberbullying. Those who did cyberbully others, well, they came from households that had less warmth than not, more rejection than not, less structure than not, more chaos than not, less autonomy support, again, validating their preferences and their opinions, and more coercion than not. And so to summarize all that, make sure that we've got a lot of love going on in our family. It matters so much. Make sure that we have set times to do certain things. For example, having dinner, because it's simply a point in time where you get together, and I know it might be forced at the beginning, but you share stories and you do life together. And then if we have to have high expectations and believe that our kids are going to rise up, that matters so much. I have about 6 minutes left, and so I'm just going to get close to wrapping up here. Let's talk about resilience. When I think about resilience, I think about a rubber ducky in a bathtub. And let's say you push it underwater, but what happens? It pops right back up. And in part, not fully, but in part, we want our kids to be resilient. To define it, it's just to bounce or spring back. But more than that, we want them to develop certain social and academic competence because, to be honest, they're going to deal with stress perhaps every day. You and I deal with stress constantly, and so they have to develop those skills. Other scholars have said that it might be the fourth R. You've got reading, writing, arithmetic, and then maybe also resilience. Is it actually that important? Perhaps. I bet if I'm talking to many of you who have succeeded, you'd be able to tell me, you know what? Resilience has been a key factor in that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to achieve what I've achieved. But note that it's not a personality trait that you either have or don't have. Instead, it's this innate characteristic that could be bolstered by environmental protective factors, which is me as an educator, you as educators, etc. So I love Viktor Frankl. I'm always in search, by the way, for life-changing books, so please come up to me later and tell me if you've got any recommendations. But I read this last fall. Viktor Frankl, he shared his story about having to serve a couple of years in a concentration camp in Auschwitz. And it broke my heart reading the story. But what he also pointed out was that he still held on to his dignity and a lot of agency, because even though he saw death and suffering all around him, he was still able to control his attitude, and he was still able to control how he thought about his present and his future and give his suffering a redemptive meaning. And that gave him hope for the future, to get him to actually persevere and last. That's Victor looking like a boss. And here's some quotes related to agency. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. Between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is our power to choose how we respond. And right there, that's our growth and our freedom. And finally, the only thing you can't take away from me is the way I choose to respond to what you do to me. It's so true. Our kids are going to have to face harassment. Our kids are going to face various sorts of struggles, not even just relational and social stuff. We want them to understand that this is an opportunity for growth. And I'm not saying that some instances of bullying and cyberbullying are not incredibly severe and we should immediately come to their aid and rescue them. But is all of it super severe? I would say that most of it is non-physical, much of it is just verbal. textual, let's say. Punishments and policies, they're not really helping that much. Plus, even though we might have a mandate to create a perfectly safe and supportive school environment, that's kind of impossible, and yet we exhaust ourselves trying. Plus, we've got to set realistic expectations. It's so very important, because otherwise we're setting them to fail. We're ill-preparing them for their future, because even though we might protect them from K through 12, they're going to get into college and then adulthood, and it might chew them up and spit them out if they haven't been taught and if they haven't learned. My colleague Izzy Kallman has always focused on the fact that natural interactions, instead of us always controlling everything and facing hardships, it's essential. Got to face adversity. That's how you cultivate resilience. And to cultivate self-confidence is problem solving. Plus, in order to develop resilience, we've got to engage risk. We can't just always be running away from it. Are we intentional about that? Are we providing that to our kids? Plus, I think it's always better to solve problems and teach kids to solve problems instead of always sort of saving them and rescuing them from them. We can't be those adults. And then we talked about this also, but we tend to focus on the risks and the dangers and the vulnerabilities in bullying and cyberbullying prevention. This is a strengths-based approach, an assets-based approach, and a much more positive viewpoint. Let's be more positive as we approach these issues. Always, the person is going to be so much more important than the program, which simply means we can't just implement a curriculum. We've got to constantly care about our relationships. Looking at the research, this simply says that those kids with higher levels of resilience, when they were bullied, and let's just for a moment assume that they will be, when they were bullied, it didn't really affect as much their ability to learn and their ability to feel safe. Those with lower levels of resilience, it did much more strongly and significantly affect their ability to learn and feel safe at school. Very same finding related to cyberbullying. And again, all this is on our website. Happy to send them to you as well. Plus, we want our kids to respond in pro-social ways when they are victimized. You can see on the right of the screen, report to school, report to site, change screen name, maybe call police, delete account, block. Those are pro-social responses. Those kids with higher levels of resilience engaged in those positive responses. However, those with the lowest levels of resilience, what did they do? They did nothing. They suffered silently. So again, that's what we got to focus in on, building resilience. And then also those kids with higher levels of resilience, they had less negative emotions. Negative emotions such as sadness, anger, frustration, fear, and embarrassment. In my field, criminology, we find out that when juveniles, when kids, adolescents, struggle with negative emotions and they haven't developed positive coping mechanisms, they end up acting out, either in violence or self-harm. So that's why it's important to sort of make sure these emotions are not very deeply internalized. So again, as I get close to wrapping up here, just a couple more minutes, I think you can develop resilience by getting kids involved in community. We want them to understand their life is much bigger than the dramas they have to deal with at school or online. Plus, it develops positive relations with pro-social, nurturing adults. It gives them a sense of empowerment. I did a lot of, helping with building houses for the homeless. I went to third world countries to work on missions trips, and I know not every student is privileged enough to get those opportunities, but I know there's stuff in your own community that your kids can get involved in. The ABC model simply means that we get adversity in our life, stress, etc. That leads to our beliefs, and then those beliefs lead to consequences. And so everything hinges on right between adversity and beliefs. It's how you think about things that actually matters and then affects your attitudes and your actions. And so, for example, if you have the belief of your rights being violated, you're going to be furious, you're going to be angry. If you feel like you've lost standing with others, you're going to be embarrassed. If you feel like your self-worth has been undermined, you're going to be sad and bummed out and depressed. So those are the emotions and the consequences that follow. Here's a quick example. Let's say you're a girl and you see this picture on Instagram and it's your friends and they had a sleepover without you and you're like, what on earth? Why wasn't I invited? And so you have the adversity, which is seeing this and not being invited to the sleepover. Then what are your beliefs? Are your beliefs, I'm a loser, they've always just pretended to like me, they don't really like me, I'm always left out, this is going to be the story of my life? Or is your belief a little bit more positive where it's like, sometimes parents only allow 3 girls to come over. Sometimes plans evolve spontaneously. Maybe they were all hanging out at soccer and then they just immediately spent the night together. And so, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to have a few friends come over to my house. I'm going to take ownership of my own fun and do what it takes. So it's all about, again, between attitudes and beliefs. It's the stuff that you say in your mind. And if you keep saying the negative things in your mind, if that tape keeps replaying, then of course that's going to lead to negative outcomes and negative consequences. Improv again, and I promise I'm almost done. The point here is that growing up, it involves so much improvisation. because every new instance, every new experience, conversation is brand new, and you're sort of learning as you go, and you're thinking off the top of your head. So one of my colleagues, Stan Davis, does a lot of work in this area, and it leads to creativity. It leads to ad-libbing. It leads to, as I mentioned, thinking fast on your feet, and spontaneity and collaboration and communication. And there's specific curriculums that you can implement in your schools and organizations to facilitate improv. This, by the way, also helps those with disabilities and special needs. For example, on the autism spectrum, and they learn, again, how to interact better with their peers. And then literature, these are my favorite books. I loved it, Human Bondage. Fish in a Tree is tied into that quote by Einstein, which says, everyone is a genius, but if a fish is judged by its inability to climb a tree, then it's going to live its whole life believing that it's stupid. Grapes of Wrath, Count of Monte Cristo, incredible movie and book, and The Island of the Blue Dolphins. Here are my favorite movies related to resilience. And I won't spend time talking about them, but just to give you an idea that there is a tremendous thread of resilience in each of these. And then heroes. I love Malala Yousafzai and how she just epitomizes resilience. Joan of Arc and how she led the French against the English in the 100 Years' War in the 1400s. She's a hero to me. George Washington Carver. And then my point here with the picture of my dad and my sister is that my dad came over from India, and he just wanted a better life for his future kids, even before he got married. And I love that because that takes a lot of confidence and resilience because he had to face so many obstacles. And I share that with you just to point out, all of you have stories of resilience in your own life. Share them with your kids. You might think they're going to roll their eyes and sigh, but try to find them in a very vulnerable moment where they will listen, and I promise you it'll have a lot of impact. And then this will be my last story. Resilience through practice. This is the inside of my toilet. I share this with you because I rented for a very long time, and then I saved up enough to put a down payment on a home, which is much like your story. But also in this situation, my dad never taken me around the house and showed me how to fix these sorts of things, so I had to learn on my own. And so I was like, okay, I could spend a couple $100 and call a plumber, but it's like, no, I'm a homeowner, I can do this. And I got YouTube now, and I'm gonna figure this out. So I watched a few videos, and I went to our local hardware store. I actually took 2 trips. I got all the parts that I needed. I came back and I tackled it. And it was really frustrating because water was still running into the toilet bowl. I was like, what am I doing wrong? So I took it apart and I put it back together. It was still happening. I kid you not, it took me 3 hours to finally get it right. And I was hating myself, and I was like, why is life so hard? Things are always like this. This is how the rest of my life is gonna be when it comes to any home improvement. But I figured it out again in 3 hours. And now, believe it or not, within 10 minutes, I can come to your home and I can change out the innards of a toilet just like that. And it gave me so much self-confidence because I overcame that adversity and developed resilience so that now I'm tackling many other home projects. I've installed a ceiling fan, I've installed dimmer switches, and I've only been electrocuted 1 time. I also worked on my car a little bit, and so I'm learning. The point is that we've got to give our kids experiences like this because it does help instead of always just rescuing them and saving them. This is my shoulder. Again, very last point. Resilience is tied into inoculation. I'm allergic to a million things. I know Dr. James O'Higgins Norman from the Anti-Bullying Center over at Dublin City University, where I'm doing a lot of work, he is also allergic to a million things. But I keep being injected by the allergens themselves, mild doses, mild strains, etc. And the hope is that I'm going to develop a tolerance or resistance to it, a resilience to it really also as well. And so that could be specifically tied into how we're raising our kids. If we give them mild instances of hardship, of adversity, and we give them the encouragement and the support that they need, maybe, just maybe, they will overcome. And that's what we want as they face bullying and cyberbullying. If you need anything in the future, please reach out. I'm happy to get back to you. You can tell I care deeply about this issue. Thanks for being patient with the technological issues, and thank you once again to Friends for an amazing conference.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Hinduja.
Thanks, Ellen.
And thank you for inspiring, and maybe we all become more askable adults when we come home.
Yes, askable adults, absolutely.
And we have a gift for me, a taste of Sweden. Like
Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Very good.